Alrighty, so I've got my scene open, and the first thing I like to do, I'm going to hold down the space bar. I left mouse click up above this hotbox menu and hold, and it pulls up yet another menu. And at the top right corner, I'm going to click Hypershade Render Perspective, which gives me this view here. Okay, so I've got my perspective window, I've got my Hypershade, I've got my material viewer. Now, I actually don't use the material viewer in the properties here because sometimes it can throw you off. I mean, sometimes I will, because you can actually choose, oh, do I want to show this representation in Arnold like that? So if you see that, check it out. This is what it looks like rendering this ball in Arnold. And I can use my Alt left mouse, but you can already see it's using an HDR image to light it, and you see how good that looks, right? And whatever material I have selected, it will highlight in here so you can see just what that material looks like. So it's a nice quick way of getting the results of a material. I don't always use it, I just usually throw it on the model. And you have to be very careful because it will show what was last selected, not what object you have selected. So sometimes you might go, why? I'm tweaking it out here, why isn't it affecting my object? And it's because it's not using the material that you actually want to manipulate. So that's where it can get, you have to kind of keep double checking. So I can view it as hardware or Arnold to show, and Arnold is giving me an actual good representation of it. The benefit of that is if I'm using an Arnold material, which we're about to talk about, but if I right click in this area, my Hypershade, and what you see are all these little tabs are showing me what's in my scene. Okay, so these are the materials currently in my scene, these are the textures that are currently in my scene, the utilities, rendering nodes, lights, etc. So if I go back to materials, I right click and I say I want to create a brand new material that will be an Arnold shader surface, and I choose AI standard surface. Now if you're using Arnold, this is the material you want to use. AI standard surface. That's what you're going to use for most things. Okay. Now, I have the AI standard surface selected, and you can see this material here. And I'm just going to show you real quick inside of this since it's open. But if I go to the materials properties, which you'd also see in the attribute editor over here, and I start changing it, you start to see what the different properties do. Right? So under base, that's the color of the material. So I could click on the little color box. I could change it to like a blue color like that. Yes. Arnold is the renderer inside of Maya that we'll be using. So there's lots of different renderers, but the realistic renderer that we'll be using is Arnold, which is a movie quality renderer. So I can adjust the diffuse roughness. We'll talk about these settings. The metalness of it. Oh, look, now it looks like die-cast metal. Love that. I can adjust the specularity, which is the shininess of it. So you see when I turn that down, the weight of it at 0 means not shiny at all. At 1, it's very shiny. Now, Arnold uses, and Unreal also does, and depending on what materials you're using in Unity, it uses as well, but PBR, physically based rendering materials, right? They're based off of roughness. So when I adjust roughness, a 0 means that this is basically like a mirror, super smooth, so I can see a strong reflection. 1 means it's matted. It's a matte material, so it's like, it's not, because of imperfections on the surface, it's not a shiny material. It's rough like a rock or flat paint or things like that. And anywhere in between is different variations of it. So look at that, where I'm getting this diffused reflection now. IOR is adjusting essentially the light refracting through on the surface. So depending on how I adjust that, look at this. Do you see this? Check it out. It's actually refracting the light on the surface, giving me different effects. Now, understanding and getting these can be really difficult. So, I shared in the resources, in the files, there's a marmoset link that shows you properties of different materials. So if I'm trying to make gold or granite or whatever, and it goes through it. But here's a little tip for if you're using Arnold, which you'll really like and will give you a good jump on making materials. Check this out. When I have an Arnold material, if I go up to the top right where it says presets in the attribute editor, and I click on that, these are presets of different base materials. A balloon, blood, brushed metal, car paint, glass. So if I say, oh, what is this? I want to make glass. I'm going to start off with a base glass material. There's my glass. If I want to start with, oh, this is going to be blood material. Oh, this is going to be a, gold. And I just click on it and say replace. Look at that. And then this gives me a base of what the refraction index is. It gives me a roughness. It gives me the base color. And then from there, I can go nuts. There's even one for jade or skin. Now, it looks weird here because I'd have to go into these other settings like the subsurface scattering and start to adjust how the skin, how light is going through it. And we'll talk more about that later. But it's just nice to know. It's like, oh, I want rubber. A thin plastic. Two-tone car paint. And if you can find what your basement, a bubble, like that iridescent liquid, and we're seeing the colors on this, surface, and now it's refracting. So this is really awesome because it gives us a base point to start off with, and then we can go in and start to tweak out these different properties that we're using to get what you want. But I thought it'd be really cool just so that you guys could see that chrome for like if I'm doing a mirror in my scene. Or maybe I have furniture that has chrome bars or pieces on it, and I just want to assign this material just to those pieces, right? Just to the faces that are going to use it. Not everything has to be on one texture. You can assign materials to the faces of an object. Okay? So this makes it, it's really nice to be able to go into there and be able to create a base material and then go in and then adjust how you want it from there. My Hypershade shows me all the materials, and then down here, right, I'm using Alt right mouse button, or if you're on a Mac computer, Option right mouse button. And this is the hierarchy, the link of how these materials are connected together. So as I start to add textures and things, they start connecting into these properties, and I can manually do it. So I can attach things directly by dragging them inside of here you know, into these different areas. Or if I am in the attribute editor, wherever there's a little checkerboard to the right is where I can put a texture or a procedural texture or something like that. Some objects you actually don't, materials you don't even have to add a texture to. You can make them procedurally. And we'll actually get into that. Making like grapes and, you know, cheese and stuff like that just using procedural textures. So that means, cool part is, you don't have to actually make a texture for absolutely everything in your scene all the time. Sometimes you can do a procedural texture and it'll look just as good, if not better. It really depends on what you're trying to pull off. The other standard materials that you'd use, like the so if I were using Maya software, I'm not going for like a movie render, I just want to render it out, or I'm bouncing back and forth between programs like maybe even Substance or Unity or something like that, is different materials that have different properties like the Lambert, the Blinn, a Phong, or anisotropic. And what you'll notice is that, let me switch these over to hardware now so that you can see these. And you can see how these different materials respond. Specular, shininess. So in the Phong, the cosine is trying to emulate roughness of a material. The rougher a material is, the less reflectivity and the more blurred an actual reflection would be. The smoother it is, you'll get more of that shine. If you're using the Arnold renderer, the AI shaders work the best. And they have specific parameters for them. The reason I'm telling you this is because when you guys start to actually add your materials and tweak them out as you put your textures on, you want to like think about what you're going for realism, or how you want to be able to control the shininess, the reflectivity, all that kind of good stuff. Any questions on that part as far as just the just some of the materials? We'll start going over them and more, but I just wanted you to see where they're at and just what some of their properties are. If ever I want to change the color of a material, I simply go into the color box that's next to the word color, and then I can change the color of the material in there. If I want to add a texture to it, I click on the little checker box next to it, and that's how I bring in my textures that I create. Now, lighting-wise, there's a lot of different things we have to consider. So if you guys have this scene open right now, I'm going to show you how to make glass for the window and how to set it up so that if your object has transparent parts or a transparency, just so you can see it. Okay. The other thing is, depending on which version, now this is where it gets a little confusing, especially for you guys who might be working at home on Maya. Maya, as of late, loves lots and lots of different updates. If I go to the help up top and say about Maya, and it will tell me which version I have eventually. There it is. And you'll see that, well, it's a little hard to read, but I'm on version on my laptop Maya 2018.4. So that's going to help about Maya, and it's 2018.4. If you're at home and you're working on it, what 2018.4 does is it adds the ability of sticking the special Arnold render view that we're going to be using into a window and not having it floating. And it also gives you this option, that when I'm in the scene under renderer, I can actually just click. Check this out. This is my hardware render. I could switch to Arnold right there. And it pulls this up. And when I hit play, it's rendering Arnold in my view. Now, if you're not on 2018.4, it won't give you that option. So, I'll just hit stop, close. That's alright, and back to viewport. But first, let's get our scene set up. Right now, if I press the number 4, I'm in wireframe view. 5 is flat shaded. 6 is how you turn on textures. So if I have textures on objects, 6 will make it turn on. And 7 is lit mode. And what you'll notice right now, I have an area light up top, a regular area light, just so I can work inside of here. It's only temporary, but it's so I can actually see things. And if I want to see shadows inside of here, there's an option in my view under lighting where I could just turn on shadows. And now check it out. Look, I've got shadows in hardware view. So once again, that's in my camera view. It's under lighting, shadows. If I'm not in mode 7, shadows is not checkable. So you have to press 7 and have a light in your scene for that to work. This will bog down your system a lot if you have a very large, complicated scene and is trying to calculate real-time shadows for everything, so keep that in mind. Works great for something like a room like this, or maybe even small, like small areas. If I'm like, oh yeah, here's my city, yeah, it's going to be chugging. So, before I continue, any questions? Yes? Which screen? Oh, you mean the Hypershade and all that? Yeah. Hold down your space bar. Left mouse click and hold above all the menus. Way up. So, right about an inch above, let's just say that. Above the hotbox that you have there. Yeah, so, yeah, and that space up there. So if I hold this down right up here, right above it, left mouse click and hold. And when I do that, then go to the top right Hypershade render perspective. So make sure that you're in your scene. You've clicked on one of these windows, just so it highlights. Hold down spacebar, and then left mouse click above it, and then go to Hypershade render. So holding down your spacebar pulls up your Hypershade. Let me just pause, just make sure everybody's got it. Resume. Okay, so whenever you guys have an object like our little room, our environment here, and the way it's modeled out, you'll notice it's a box with the normals flipped inward. And this is how a video game works, right? So whenever I have an environment that I'm walking in, polygons have a front and a back, and the normals are faced inward. But the way that this is set up is that this, the windows here and here are built into the model. Okay? So watch what I do. I'm going to, I right click and go to face mode, and I'm going to select this window, and I'm going to shift select the other window. So I'm in face mode, and I selected both windows on either side of the house. And with them selected, I'm going to right click on it and hold and say assign new material. So I can assign a new material to an entire object, or I can assign it to faces of an object. And it pulls up this little menu when it said, when I said assign new material. And I want to go to where it says Arnold Shader, and then choose AI Standard Surface. So I selected those faces of the window, right-clicked on it, assign new material, and I assigned an AI Standard Surface to that material. And in my attribute editor on the right, here's how we can get to this. I select now that face, one of the faces of the windows again. I right-click on it and just go, if I want to get to that material quickly, right-click and say Material Attributes. And in my attribute editor, you'll notice it pops up that material. So once again, I selected both the faces. With them selected, right-clicked, assign new material. I chose an Arnold AI Standard, Arnold shader AI Standard Surface. And here it is showing up in my attribute editor after I right-clicked and said Material Attributes. So it's showing right now as AI Standard Surface 2, and I want to change the name of that so it makes sense. So I'm just going to change that in the attribute editor to AI Standard Glass. And that way, if I apply this to other objects, if I need to, I can immediately spot it. I could just call it glass material or something like that. You just don't want it too long, and you don't want to have weird characters and stuff. And now, while I have this, I could either make it glass by going to the option called Transmission and changing the weight of it to 1. Or I could go in under Presets and just simply go for glass. That's easy. Presets, Glass, Replace. And now it's actually acting as glass. How do I know that? Watch this. If I take an object and duplicate it now, and I move it outside, we could see through the glass that's actually here. Now, there's one other thing I have to do, though, before this will truly work when I start lighting my scene. Select the room, and this is any object that you use that is going to have glass or transparency. You have to tell the object that it is not opaque. So I select that object, I go into my attribute editor, and to the right, there's a little tab called Arnold, and I make sure to uncheck, if it's checked, uncheck where it says opaque. So select the object in object mode, go to the shape tab of it, and under Arnold, make sure opaque is not checked. So I'll just say it again, so now that I'm recording. If you guys downloaded that one of the HDR maps from hdrmaps.com, they go in your source images folder. And now that I've got my transparency and my lighting set up, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And up at the top where it says Arnold, I'm going to go to Lights, and I'm going to choose AiSkyDome Light. So Arnold, up at the top, all the way to the right next to Help, Lights, AiSkyDome Light. And notice this, it made this dome. You see that? I'm just going to scale this dome up a little bit, so it's not quite so congested. So I pressed R and just scale from the center, make it a little bigger. And notice how my room looks now. And for right now, now that I have this in there, I'm going to get rid of the area light that I have up top. I'm just going to delete that. And now it's like, wait a minute, I can't see anything. So for right now, I'm just going to go back to mode 6, like 5 and then 6. And I want you to check this out. Go back to that tab up top where it says Arnold, and the very first option, click Render View, or just Render, under Arnold up at the top. And look what it's creating now. If my, if I'm inside my room, we can see this. So, what we see is that this light is now shining like everywhere, kind of euphoric, illuminating this room. And what I want to do is, if I have that image, let me zoom out, and I'm going to click on that sphere, the AiSkyDome. So I have it selected in my attribute editor. And if I, just so you guys can see the difference, I'm going to click where it says color, that little checkerboard box to the right under the SkyDome, and watch what happens when I put an HDR image in there. Oops, if I have an HDR image, let me go grab one. So I'm just going to go let me just grab oh, there's one. I'll just grab this image here, copy, and put it into my source images folder. And I'm going to put that HDR image, this one right here, to light my scene. So it's a nice little desert shot, some mountains and the sun really bright. So I'm going to slap that one into there. And what you'll see, look at that, is it wraps it inside of this scene. You see that? So granted, I wouldn't necessarily want my house in the middle of a road, but we'll just use that for right now. It's like, why do cars keep hitting my house? So what I am going to do is select this SkyDome and rotate, press E and grab the green circle to rotate it so it's coming through the window that I want at an angle. So it's going to come through this window back here, just like that. And now put the camera back in. Let me close and just refresh my render view. And now you'll notice a big difference of how the room is actually being lit now. Arnold renders in passes, so that's how we're seeing it kind of get really noisy and start to clear up over a time. But we can already see the differences here, right? Good questions. The question is, does changing the size of the SkyDome affect anything? It affects how it views in the window, so its placement and stuff. So as I move the SkyDome, you might see it change a little bit. But what you'll also see, I mean, this is just a representation of where it's at, but really it doesn't affect too much. Just its scale and kind of stuff like that. It just gets it out of the way, so I'm not going in and out of it.
closer, will it be brighter?
Not really. It's just a representation, so it's more infinite. So whether it's right outside the wall or like far away, it's still thinking of it as like an infinite light that's just going inward. But we could see how that's affecting it. Its rotation is more important from where the lighting is coming through, right? Now, as I go in, like let's say if I selected this and press F to zoom into that table right here, so we could see the lighting like that. Watch what happens when I right-click and assign a new material. Once again, we'll choose the AI standard surface. Notice that how the AI standard surface is looks a lot better than that Lambert. We're getting some reflections on there. We're getting some more details on it. So I could change its color. To more of a brown, like a wood kind of texture, just as a placeholder till I get it textured with a wood. I could adjust its roughness to say, you know, how reflective or shiny it is. But you can already see a big difference in just how that looks, right? Now, you notice it's taking a while for it to render and calculate. And the reason being is because if I zoom out of my scene, and I can pause the render by clicking on that little red button to pause it or play or start rendering again, but if I zoom out and I actually do a render, you'll see it's illuminating the entire environment. You see that? And that actually is taking more calculation. So if I'm never going to have the camera on the outside, but I'm lighting, part of my lighting is coming from outside, I can use what's called AiLightPortals, and that'll speed up my renders. And what a light portal does is it tells the outside lighting only to come through and calculate through the windows or the areas I designate. And that will speed things up. So let me show you how that works. I go to Arnold, Lights, Light Portal. Arnold, Lights, Light Portal. And the confusing thing, I wish they would change this, it looks like an area light, but it's not. So this looks exactly like an area light, and that's kind of annoying. But what I can do is this. Watch this. I'm going to rotate this. And I'm going to line it up so that it is the size of the window. Scaling it in different ways. And what's going to happen is this guy is going to block the lighting from hitting everywhere else outside but through this hole. So I'll make it just a wee bit bigger than the window just so it doesn't have some weird overlap. You know, or just it doesn't cut short. And what you'll notice now is if I hit render, you see how in this shot it's rendering the whole outside? Watch when I render now. You see it's only shining where that portal is. So it's not calculating all this other stuff. And that will make for a much faster, look how much faster it's rendering out now. And more focused. Way quicker, right? And more realistic. at least in how it's calculating, but doing it way faster going through there. And what I might want to do is, because there's another big window there, let me pause. Whenever I'm working, I pause the render. Is I'm just going to take this light portal, Control D to duplicate it, pull it to the other side, and then rotate it so that we have light coming from both sides. Tuck that in a little bit. This is really useful if I have outside lighting coming in, but I don't want to have it calculate all this other stuff it doesn't need to calculate. So now if I do my render, you see it's going much faster now because it's not trying to calculate all this weird stuff. So the question is, do you place it outside the window? Or I usually put it just slightly on the outside, just because if I don't, then I could have that edge, because it's not going to calculate what's behind it. So I might have this dark edge if I pull it in. So in other words, if I were to take this guy, this light portal, and push it in, like right now you see it's halfway in to the sill or a little bit more of the window pane. And then when I actually go to render, do you see there's a dark shadow behind where it's at? So I want to pull it out. See that? I'm pushing it out with the middle mouse, just moving it, so that I don't get a weird shadow that's there for no apparent reason. Because it literally is making a hole that the light is going through, and if that is pushed in too far, then that window pane is going to show a lack of light on half of it that doesn't make much sense. Does that make sense? So that's where you'd want to put it. But when you're trying to speed up your renders, this is going to be a big thing. So as you start texturing things, you want to put a new material on different objects. The only time you can use the same material on multiple objects if it is the same material and it's not unique, right? But you want to get into the habit. So in other words, I wouldn't use necessarily a different material for every leaf. I'd use one material for all the leaves. One material for the plant. If I had them combined on the same texture, I would, but in this case, they're going to have different properties to each other, so I don't want them to have the exact same material because the leaves are more translucent than the pod itself. And I would start to go in. Now, suppose... So actually, you know what? I'm going to stop this video here for the outside lighting. Well, let me do one more thing and then we'll go to the inside lighting. So, let's say I like how this is going, but I'm not getting enough light going through that window like I want. Okay? So there's a few things I can do, and inside of my Hypershade render, I can always go to lights, and these are the lights. These are the light portals, and there's my AiSkyDome. So I can tweak out properties in my AiSkyDome. I can increase the exposure. And you see now it's more intense. So I increased it to a 1. If I'm using a very high resolution texture on the back and I want to get better light calculation, its default resolution is 1000, and ideally if I'm using a 2000 by 2000 or something image, I would increase that to 2000. I can also, where it says visibility, increase certain properties of the visibility of a light. The diffuse properties, the transmission. So the transmission is where it's going through transparencies. So watch this. This light that's going through there, because it's going through glass. Let me show you this real quick. if I actually click on this little camera all the way at the bottom right of my render, it saves an image of it. I'm going to increase the transmission to, say, 5, just so you can see the difference. Now, look at where the light is hitting the window, or we're hitting the table. That's at 5. That's at its default. So I can mess around and fine-tune things. If I like, oh, let me drop the exposure back down. But I increased the transmission so it's brighter through the transparency. So you can really start to fine-tune things to get the look that you want. Now, I may find that, you know what, I'm just not getting the look that I want from there, and I want more intense light. So one more thing I can do for the outside is set up an external light, whether it's an AI area light or a directional light. So if I drop that back down to like a 1, and we see how it darkens that out. I'm going to pause this. And Maya does allow, or Arnold does allow you to use Maya lights. So if I like create, or go up to the top where it says create lights, we have different lights here. Ambient light. Arnold does not work with an ambient light, so don't even use one if you're rendering in Arnold. But directional lights, point lights, spotlights, it uses. And it has its own area light. So even though you can use the regular area light, there's an Arnold light under the Arnold tab up top under lights that you can use. A directional light is a light that's like the sun. Okay? It's an everywhere light going in one direction that casts a shadow. But for something localized like this, I'm going to close this, I'm just going to choose Arnold Lights Area Light. And if I actually, now this is where I said this is confusing. If I scroll and make this, you notice it looks identical, annoyingly so, to the light portal. But if I take this light, and I'm just going to rotate it, and this is going to be my light coming from outside. And I don't want it to go inside the room because then it's going to give me a weird effect. But I want it to kind of be pointing in the same direction that the sunlight is basically pointing. Okay. So do you see I have this area light outside here, kind of acting like light from the sun? And what I want you to realize is that whenever you're lighting in Arnold, lights by default will appear to not work until you turn up either their exposure or intensity. You'll like, why is it broken? And so let me show you what I mean. If I do a render right now, I don't see any difference even though I have this humongous light outside. But watch this. As soon as I start to crank up the exposure, and I have to go a little higher. So right now, this is what it looks like at its default. I'm just going to keep that image while it's rendering. I'm going to crank up the exposure to 5. Still nada. Let's try 10. 15. Now I'm starting to see it at when I hit 15 or something. And now I'm starting to get a much stronger hit of that light. Now, you don't want to go nuts. If I crank up the exposure like to 50, look what happens. It's a nuclear winter, so yeah, you're blasted. So you want to try and tone that 25. Whoa, that is hot. That is way hot. Probably a little too much. I mean, it's working. You know, you've burned out your retinas from looking out of the window, but it is working. And we can always use the temperature and start to warm it up a little bit. That looks kind of cool, even though it's way intense. That's from that area light coming through the window. Look at that. Now, I've cranked it up too high, but man, you're getting a lot of light in there. Look at that. So maybe a little less. Let's try like a 20. That's a little better. Maybe even a 15. We don't want to like overdo it. But you do what is appropriate for the environment. God, that sounded green. But in either case, we have that in there. And that's another way I could start to get the lighting to come through a little more intense on this side. Stick it out there and just start to increase that a little bit. And I can even, we'll talk about some of the settings in the next video.